Howdy folks, Jambareeqi here. Last month on this channel I reviewed the first season of Rick and Morty as a birthday present from my brother Joe. I enjoyed this crazy, strange, funny show so much that I thought I'd review the second season this month. Rick and Morty follows the adventures of eccentric scientist Rick Sanchez and his neurotic grandson Morty, with the rest of their family sometimes being caught in between their wild science fiction shenanigans. Now, season 2 of this show isn't drastically different from the first season, it's pretty much more of the same thing. But that's not bad at all, simply because Rick and Morty doesn't exactly have a formula or status quo to follow. Every episode is an unpredictable surprise, thanks to the unique sci-fi setting and Rick's immense imagination as a scientist. There's more crazy strange technology, more silly ideas, more clever ways of telling sci-fi based stories, and more hilarious, surreal black comedy to laugh at. However, that doesn't mean I have nothing to discuss in this video. If that was the case, then I'd be just sitting here in silence. No, because there are some elements that feel more prominent in this season compared to the first. Certain traits of the show that are more pronounced, which the writers use to further develop the series' world and characters. I think the most consistent theme in this season has to be the subject of ethical philosophy. I'm not saying that older episodes never touched on this, but season 2's plot seemed to be heavily centered on moral conundrums. Many episodes focus on finding comedy in scenarios that challenge moral justification. What I love is that these situations are never painted with a black and white stroke. Instead, the episodes will find the ironic humor in doing what we initially believe is the right thing, by showing the tragic consequences or sacrifices made after making decisions that we assume are justified. For example, there's an episode where Summer is waiting in a space car while Rick and Morty go in search of fuel. While left alone, the space car is programmed to protect Summer, but what does that mean? And how far will Summer go to be defended from violent or aggressive threats outside the car? The situation opens up a whole can of worms regarding the subjects of self-defense. Is it possible to protect yourself from danger without causing any casualties or victims? This episode finds the humor in Summer's ethical dilemma by exploring how frustratingly difficult it is for the space car to do her job, and how traumatizing it is for Summer to see victims of her self-defense. There's comical value in seeing how Summer words her commands to the space car, instructions that seem simple enough but wind up the space car because she's being left with less and less options, as Summer is concerned for the health and safety of others as well as her own.
I am currently constructing a security measure in compliance with your parameters, but I do want to say, you are not making this easy.
You know you're kind of a dick, right?
My function is to keep Summer safe, not keep Summer being, totally stoked about, the general vibe and stuff. That's you. That's how you talk.
This episode's plot is just one example of the many ways that the show creates comedy by finding funny paradoxes in moral justifications. A character will self-righteously assume that they're doing what's best, then the episode will show the ironic ramifications of that character's well-meaning choice. It's humor with depth, comedy that makes you laugh and also think. But tragic irony is also used for dramatic weight in the show too, because let's not forget that this show has its serious moments as well. There's an episode where parasites brainwash the Smith family into believing that they are their longtime family friends. Fabricated flashbacks are created to help convince everyone that these wacky disguises are genuinely real loved ones. Each flashback generates a new over-the-top cartoony character to join the Smith household. But it turns out that these parasites can only create good memories, which means that if they can't provide an example of a bad memory with a Smith, they can be easily suspected as a parasite. Considering how cruel and mean-spirited these family members can be to each other, it's an effective way of knowing who is really actually part of the family. However, the episode also opens up a flaw to this approach. Once all the parasites are killed off, Beth is suspicious of a surviving character called Mr. Poopy Butthole. Instinctively, Beth shoots Mr. Poopy because she can't find any unhappy memories of him. But it turns out that he's not a parasite. It's a shocking surprise for both Beth and the audience, because the evidence was there to indicate that he could have been a parasite. This really speaks volumes for Beth's character too. She's so used to being mistreated by loved ones that she can't convince herself that one would never give her a bad memory. Sure, it's funny to learn that this silly named character is actually real, but his existence means that an innocent family friend has become victim to Beth's misjudgment. I mean, I find it quite disturbing how Beth resorts to drinking straight after shooting Mr. Poopy, showing how dependent she really is on alcohol. The way she shakes while pouring the glass is kind of unsettling too. She looks so frightened and messed up about what she's done. Another running motif in this season was quite an odd one: ice cream. Yes, many episodes included characters eating ice cream or making references to ice cream. Perhaps these ice cream nods mean nothing at all, but I do think that there's some thematic weight to them. You see, ice cream is frequently associated with being a comfort blanket, a guilty pleasure snack to help a broken heart or a bad day. As our characters are going through hardships like stress, puberty, loneliness, and relationship problems, I often saw the ice creams as symbols of dealing with negative emotions. We could read all these ice creams as our characters' ways of handling sadness or confusion. Ice cream reminds us of innocent childhood memories, a sweet treat used as a coping mechanism by many people when down, so it'd make sense that our characters would rely on ice cream for comfort. Again, maybe I'm looking too deep into it, and perhaps the show's creators just really like ice cream, but it's just how I interpreted the motif personally. But besides making us question common ethics and spot every scene with an ice cream cone, Season 2 is also more willing to explore the character of Rick. The great thing about Rick is that he's so fascinatingly strange and secretive that finding anything out about him is worth discovering. It's a true test of a character's appeal when they make audiences want to dissect their every facet. For example, I never felt like Rick was that interested in sex, because he always seemed more invested in scientific projects than any kind of intimacy. Yet, one particular episode opened up a load of information regarding Rick's sexuality. In this episode, Rick reunites with his ex-partner called Unity, who happens to be an ambiguous entity that can possess entire races. The fact that Rick is attracted to someone highly abstract and gender-neutral lets the audience know that he's actually openly pansexual. But we also learn that he does actually enjoy pursuing sex, and has some wildly bonkers fetishes.
Oh yeah! I want you! Go, son, go! Go, son, go!
Rick is an entertainingly eccentric character, yet we know very little about him, so whatever we do learn becomes even more interesting than it should be. Season 2 also continues to explore the dark side of Rick's character, never shying away about how broken and depressed he is behind the nonsensical catchphrases and silly dancing. After being dumped by Unity, Rick actually considers suicide in the season's most emotionally powerful scene, which is played entirely seriously. The laser machine's breakdown is the only thing that stops him from going ahead with it. It's a heartbreaking moment that shows Rick's mortality and humanity, as well as his destructive nature and complex personal issues. It's clear that Rick is constantly hurting inside due to loneliness, considering that the breakup reminds him how often he pushes people away. It does raise questions about Rick's other romantic relationships, especially his marriage with Beth's mother. We only sometimes get teased about information regarding Mrs. Sanchez though, so we're still in the dark about that aspect of Rick's history. One episode though, which serves as the season finale, actually shows us Rick's feelings on marriage. In this episode, Rick's best friend Bird Person is getting married, and all Rick can do is cynically remind everyone that marriage always ends up with heartbreak.
You know, you're not being very supportive of Bird Person on his big day.
Bird Person's big day, Morty, was at Blood Ridge on Glapflap's third moon against the Gromflamites. This is a losing battle.
It's one clue that does shed more potential light on Rick's relationship with his ex-wife. Speaking of marriage, this season actually carries on the petty squabbles of Rick's daughter Beth and her husband Jerry. While I can imagine that fans are now getting tired of seeing these two bickering, their marriage problems do lead to a really imaginative episode, in which the two of them take therapy on another planet, where the couple's mental interpretations of each other are turned into sentient creatures, to help the two better understand each other's perspectives. However, Jerry's perception of Beth breaks free from her cage and she starts creating an army of Jerrys. It's a really clever and exciting way of exploring Beth and Jerry's marriage, creatively using the show's sci-fi based technology to examine their relationship. I feel as if this episode alone proves that Beth and Jerry's marriage can inspire some fun stories. While I do appreciate that their on and off again relationship is poking fun at a sitcom trope, I will admit that I do want their relationship to go somewhere in a future season, whether that means for good or bad. But hang on now, let's not forget the Morty in the Rick and Morty title of this show. He's still a lead character in this season. While he continues to be very nervous and pedantic, there are episodes that explore other dimensions of his character. In one episode, Rick and Morty end up on a planet that's holding a purging festival. At first, the two just observe from above, and Morty feels uncomfortable watching. However, once stuck in the middle of the purge, Morty suddenly embraces his primal rage and begins taking pleasure from slaying those around him. In a dark way, it's quite fun to see Morty's more psychotically aggressive side. Dark feelings pent up from years of stressful home life and scary space adventures. Then, in another episode, Rick, Morty and an alien scientist are stuck in a microdimensions wild jungle. While Rick and the alien scientist would rather put their bitter rivalry before practical survival, Morty goes off to live with the local tribe called the Tree People. Months later, we reunite with Morty to learn that he's become the tribe's chief. We actually get to see Morty taking charge, proving that he can be strong and tactical. I mean, it's quite impressive that he's not only been welcomed into this tribe, but also achieved a position of power. Because he's now empowered as a chief, he can use this tribe to have the upper hand on the two childish scientists, forcing them to put aside their differences and find a way out of this micro-dimension. It's really awesome to see Morty being the more practical thinking and strong-willed one this time round, while his grandfather is too busy arguing and fighting with the alien scientist. Now, this season also ended with a cliffhanger, before it went on a 2-year hiatus. I do feel sorry for fans who had to wait a whole 2 years to see the story continue. Like I said, in the season finale, Rick and his family attend his best friend Bird Person's wedding to Summer's friend Tammy. However, we also learn that Bird Person and many of his wedding guests are actually wanted criminals. Then, it turns out that Tammy is actually an undercover agent, bent on killing all these wanted aliens, including her husband. Not only did I find this twist quite shocking, but I was also quite sad to see Bird Person go. There was a charm to his laid-back nature and the intelligent wisdom he provided for other characters. Then again, alternate realities exist in this show's universe, so maybe we might see a version of him again. We also find out that Rick is on the same wanted list that Bird Person was on. So he says that the Smith family have to hide away on another planet. While listening in on his family, Rick learns that Beth and the kids are willing to hide away to protect Rick, because they love him. Which really annoys Jerry, because then that means that the family is stuck on this planet for the rest of their lives. So Rick decides to give himself in, under the condition that his family is left alone. Not only does this cliffhanger leave us with an ending where Rick is now in a space jail, but we also get to see Rick's softer side, as he makes a huge sacrifice for his family. Sure, Rick can be an asshole, but he's not completely apathetic. It is clear that there's still a soul behind his mean-spirited exterior. This wasn't the only time that Rick was willing to sacrifice himself this season too. In one episode, Rick actually puts Morty's life before his own, as he gives his grandson an advantage of survival. So this cliffhanger isn't a huge change of character. Rick is a good man deep down, but only lets this side out when push comes to shove. I'm really excited to see where Season 3 takes us, because Season 2's cliffhanger was so jaw-droppingly exciting. A little update. While working on this video, I ended up watching the first episode of Rick and Morty's third season, titled The Rick Shank Redemption, and I noticed that a lot of questions I raised in this video were answered in Season 3's first episode. However, I'm keeping my theories open for now, because it's important to remember that the Rick Shank Redemption aired on April Fool's Day, and the next episode won't be broadcasted until the end of this month. So there's a chance that Season 3's first episode is just an April Fool's prank, and doesn't give us the correct answers. Dan and Justin could be trolling us, but we'll have to wait and see. To conclude, Season 2 of Rick and Morty raises a lot of interesting questions about ethics and explores the character of Rick much more. I really enjoyed this season. Again, much like the last season, it's imaginative, funny, crazy, bizarre, it's a riot. I've been Jambareeqi and I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, then feel free to support me on my Patreon. Cheerio, folks.